The rankled villagers growl. Is not this Joseph's son? Their question cuts to the religious chase. It's a dismissal. Near the beginning of his public life, Jesus goes back to his hometown and visits the synagogue. There he tells people who he is and what he's about. Then he says, "Today the scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." A provocative claim. Granted, no one dozes off for this homily. But the hackles up citizens can't wait to set Jesus straight. Don't give us this stuff. We know who you are. We watched you grow up. You're just the carpenter's kid. We know the Messiah profile, and you ain't no Messiah. So stop with this religious crap. Don't get out of line, and don't make trouble. Is not this Joseph's son? That little sentence encapsulates people's response to Jesus from first to last, from beginning to end, and from then till now. Because we also know who Jesus is and isn't, right? Don't we? Ergo, we also know who God is and who God isn't, right? So, we're all really good at making objects of human beings. We put each other in pigeonholes as if we were pigeons. It goes like this. He acts like a man. She reacts like a woman. And there you have it. He's white. She's African American. And that explains it. He's clergy, social worker. She's a lawyer, a doctor. He's a teacher, a businessman. He makes $125,000 a year. She's a welfare mama. So now you know. That explains it all. They wear MAGA hats. They voted for Hillary. They're from St. Louis and they're cheering on the Rams. Actually, none of those people exist, so you can disregard that one. Oh, but wait, she's a Democrat. He's a Republican. He's gay. She's divorced. And that's the size of it, really. In the process of turning people into objects that has all these tentacles of what we believe about those kinds of people, in the process of turning others into objects, we do the very same things to ourselves without realizing it. Is not this Joseph's son? We could be looking out the window right now and say those words about anybody we see on the street of our city. We could be looking across the kitchen table at our spouses and our kids and say the same thing. Wait, I know you. We think, or we could look in the mirror. We could look in the mirror and say the very same thing. Aren't you just the carpenter's kid? We keep turning ourselves, we keep turning each other into objects. This story we just heard proclaimed is a warning against the growing demand of reducing complex realities, the mystery, for example, that another human being is, the mystery, into simplistic little boxes, and then applying those boxes to everything and to everyone in our society, such as those on the left or on the right. We boil life down to a bumper sticker or a t-shirt maxim or a baseball hat. These are dangerous trends, my friends. Dangerous trends that impoverish us all. Is not this Joseph's son? And there we are, the villagers growling about Jesus among themselves. Sure, this is Joseph's son. We got the scoop on him, the script to follow in dealing with him. And so they do, because they've made an object of him. That makes it so much easier to dismiss him, to run him out of town in the end. And it's all just that familiar. Today's gospel is a continuation of last Sunday, where Jesus mustered the courage to go back home and stand up and share what he learned about himself and who he is, what his purpose in life was. I imagine he was trembling some and also so excited to finally have figured out who he is and what he's for in this world. And the first thing I want to do is box him back into that kid who grew up down the street, who's just as ordinary and screwed up as every other kid, and whose dad is a carpenter. They want to box him back in. He finally mustered the courage to be himself, and they wouldn't let him. They drove him to the brink, the gospel ends with. The brink of what? Insanity? Did he wonder if he should jump, that he had it wrong? Is that what they meant by they drove him to the brink? The great Jewish philosopher Martin Buber said, "We often turn thous into its. And we live in a world of I-it relationships." And he nailed it. Most of the world we relate to as I-it, not I-thou, even in our families, even in our church. We make objects its of human beings, and we collude in making ourselves objects too, its as well, when we do that to other people. And yet, what's holy in life, what we deeply long for, are I-thou relationships. Subject to subject, that's what we long for. The concern of my heart this morning isn't just that we make objects of each other. My concern this morning with you is to keep it from happening to you. How do we break out of this box that keeps reducing us to objects in people's lives, even to ourselves? Everything we do, my friends, must be to try to make ourselves back into a subject, not an object, not an it, but a subject. And the more I thought about it this past week, the more I realized that Jesus always insists on making himself back into a subject when people kept trying to make him into an object. Good, that's who you are. You're good, as the rich man tried to do to him in Luke, and he protested. Or the political revolutionary, as the mother of James and John tried to do in Matthew. Or Messiah, as Peter declared in Mark. They kept trying to reduce the mystery of this human person into an it, into an object. And he's resisting. He's always resisting being made into an object. He's not going back into that box. If they drove him to the brink, the way that gospel you just heard ended is he found himself perhaps again and slipped back through that crowd and into his life. He wasn't going to give that power to them in the end, to put him back into a box. I believe that's what God is always about. Trying to make God's own self into a subject in our lives, not a philosophical abstraction or some first cause, not an idea, not an aesthetic icon hanging on your wall, or a magician who does miracles on cue. This is what we need now, God. Nor any of the other ways we tend to make God into an object instead of the mystery, who is God. God becoming a subject is at least a part of what the incarnation means. It's at least a part of why God chose flesh and blood to be with us, so that we could break God out of that box we keep shoving God into as well. And that same God is always trying to help us break out of the boxes. People, even our parents sometimes, even our priests and our popes sometimes, and for sure our politicians are trying to shove us into. To keep from making ourselves into objects, we have to resist a lot of pressure to be something we're not. We're always under pressure to be something we're not. We have to resist that, to do things that aren't rooted in our core. People are always pressuring us to do something that's not rooted in our core. The constant temptation to act and speak, even think as if we're only our profession or our work or our race or our gender or our sexual orientation or our marital status or our social standing or our nationality or our politics, whatever it is, in order to belong, to function, to get ahead, to be liked. Let me get back to that gospel question. Do you know what one of the hardest things about being a priest is? Just that. Just that. I can't tell you how much I dislike being boxed in as a priest, to think this is how a priest is supposed to act, and this is what his piety is supposed to look like, and this is how devout he's supposed to be, and this is how he's supposed to talk, and this is how he's supposed to think, and if he steps outside that box, I can't tell you how much I dislike that and how much I've disliked it for 41 years. Not everybody does that to me, probably, or to other priests, but I can tell you it's a lot of work to try to be real and human. It shrinks my relationships by defining people's expectations of me and therefore their responses to me. I would bet any money that our two sisters here today would say the same thing. Somehow Sister Betty and Sister Linda just don't play by the rules. You don't have to be with them very long, and then when you start thinking, this is not the nun that I slapped me with a paddle in grade school. But I think you would agree, we're fighting that tsunami all the time. We just want to be human, and it's sometimes surprising and shocking to people when they realize that, wow, I guess he's human. They get mad too. They get their feelings hurt too. They sin. Let me tell you. I'm not talking about you guys. If I play that game, and I often do, I'm an accomplice in the crime of making myself an object rather than a flesh and blood, wondrous yet warded person. We all play that game, you and I. But at what price is the question that needs to be asked? At what price is it becoming for us? I've worked with so many priests and sisters over the years that burned out, had nervous breakdowns. And I could say, at the risk of being a gross generalization, almost all the time was because they were trying to be somebody they're not. They were trying to live up to other people's expectations about what a priest should be like, smiling all the time and with his hands clasped tightly, and they're just human like us. And when they tried too hard, they would end up in those places where I would go to give them talks once a month for about 4 years because they broke down trying to be somebody they're not. because of the expectations. Sometimes the expectations even our spouse puts on us. If the price is our soul, if the price is allowing ourselves to be petrified into objects, it's too high. But there's also a cost to making ourselves the subject again and again and again, to try to explain things again and again, to try to break out of it and feel that judgment, that look come against you. Trying to be ourselves while everybody else is assuming we're this or that because we believe this or do that. You guys, Catholics, you're trying to be put in that same box all the time. Everybody you meet, when they find out not everybody, when people find out who you are, they assume so often the box you're in. Oh, you're a one-issue voter. Oh, you're sexist. Oh, you're homophobic. And they assume that about us. And then we feel like we got to swim upstream to say, well, so how do you be yourself and say in an institution when people say, oh, you're Catholic, object. You're an it in my life. And I'll relate to you out of that it, because I will just assume you're homophobic and sexist and a one-issue voter and everything else that goes with the package. It makes it hard to stand against that. And it can drive us to the brink. It can. Of quitting the church. The cost to being yourself is a lot of courage. The cost is paying attention to your deepest longings instead of the pitch others throw at us. Staying in touch with your deepest longings instead of the ball that's being thrown at you or what others assume about you. The cost of daring to stand our ground against the constant undertow of conformity. You and I, we must dare to remake ourselves back into subjects for our own sake and for everyone's sake. You're not just their mom, you're a human being. How do you get out of the box of being a mom? Even in the assumptions people make about you. Moms and dads are probably the first it we ever make in life. And sometimes we never let them out of that box. To love our neighbor is to live as we wish to live so that we can help liberate others to live as they wish to live. It's the people that have broken out of their box and then resisted, like Jesus of Nazareth, who help us get free from the boxes people put on us because they're standing up and standing out and willing to be pushed to the brink to be who they are. To love our neighbor is to live as we wish to live so we can help liberate others to live as they wish to live. And Oscar Wilde put it this way, same thing in different words. Selfishness is not living as one wishes to live. That's not selfish. Selfishness is asking others to live as one wishes to live. In other words, I'm not selfish if I'm trying to be true to who I am. That's not selfish. But if I'm asking you to live as I want to live, that's selfish. Let that sink in, please. To ask, to manipulate, to try to seduce or coerce others to live as I wish to live is a terrible kind of tyranny. Yet that tyranny is epidemic. The way to resist tyranny is to live as we wish to live, as it's true to my heart's desire, as true to myself. It takes guts to do that in this world. Yet living like that invites others to do the same. It is to keep remaking ourselves into subjects that encourages others to do the same too. And it takes, like I said, it takes so much courage to do this. But remember, courage is contagious. And when you read that gospel today, you start to get a sense of the courage of this man. Even when they drove him to the brink, he went back into the crowd. Do you remember that old song? I remember my mom and dad singing it around the house. It drove me crazy, but it was from some musical. I didn't even have time to look it up. Give me 10 men who are stout-hearted men, and I'll give you 10,000 more. Give me 10 men, give me 10 women who are stout-hearted, who are strong enough to be true to themselves, and I'll give you 10,000 more. That's how change happens. Is not this Joseph's son? That's the last thing I want to say, really. Jesus preferred to be rejected for who he was rather than be accepted for who he wasn't. I'm going to say that one last time because I hope to God that can be on our tombstone someday. I preferred to be rejected for who I was rather than accepted for who I'm not. That's freedom.